The first thing I want to ask is, has anybody considered the city charter? City charter actually requires that ordinances be on the topic of one subject. And this actually seems to have two subjects. It seems to have local food as a subject, and then it has self-governance as a subject. So before council passes an ordinance on either one of these, it would be, I think, the course of wisdom to separate those two issues. Are we dealing with self-governance? Are we dealing with local food? And then further, if this actually is about local food instead of self-governance, in my reading of the ordinance, there's nothing in there that refers to any food that must be grown or processed locally. There's no geographical limitations to where the food can come from. It could come from Mexico. I'm talking about the country of Mexico. It could come from Canada. It could come from Europe. The ordinance doesn't express that. So how can we be protecting Rockland's food supply when and food system when we're not even limiting the protections that the ordinance is offering to people that live in Rockland? And then if this is actually a self-governance ordinance, I would invite you to consider what the State Department of Agriculture wrote to the town of Blue Hill after they passed their local food ordinance. They wrote this: "Dear municipal official, it has recently come to my attention that an ordinance entitled Local Food and Community Self-Governance Ordinance has either passed or is being considered in your municipality. The ordinance purports to exempt local residents from certain food licensure and inspection requirements. Because this conflicts with and would frustrate the purpose of state food licensing and inspection laws, the ordinance is preempted by state law. These laws are intended to protect public health by regulating safe food handling practices. Accordingly, town residents involved in food processing and sales activities, which are subject to state licensing and inspection, are not exempt from those requirements. The Maine Department of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources will continue to license and inspect all food processors and manufacturers as provided by Maine law, including those located in the town of Blue Hill. Department personnel are instructed to work with unlicensed food processors or manufacturers to gain their voluntary compliance with the law. However, persons who fail to comply will be subject to enforcement, including the removal from sale of products from unlicensed sources and or the imposition of fines." And it's signed by Walter E. Whitcomb, the commissioner, in 2011. So what we're talking about here is first off, is Rockland doesn't have regulations with regards to the production and growing of food. So what are we offering protection from? What are we offering them exemption from in this ordinance? And then I guess the final part of this for me, and I find kind of offensive, if you read the original ordinance before it came to Rockland, in the final part of it, it mentioned that the actions that a town would take, and of course this has been changed, they've taken the one sentence out. It required that towns, if a local producer or a grower or whatever was faced with any of these, that the town actually consider what I would call secession from the state of Maine or secession from the U.S. government as a method of, what kind of people came up with this ordinance that they would consider secession because there's a rule that requires that they not use the same table that they prepare food on to change their baby's diapers, or that they not have their pet in the same place where they're processing foods. As an eater and a consumer of foods, I want to know that those things are not done. I want to know that the food supply that I'm purchasing is safe. I don't want food that may have been processed in that way being sold unlabeled in the same place that other food that meets those requirements are being sold. So that, say someone that is purchasing food that is going to resell it, or a person in a restaurant, they may somehow make a mistake and pick up the wrong thing because nothing's labeled. Okay? So please, kill this ordinance.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else wishing to speak?